Hello, this is Aaron Wissner from Michigan, along with Nicole Foss from New Zealand. It is November the 23rd, 2020 in the USA. It's a Monday, and for Nicole, it is Tuesday, November the 24th. We're going to again talk about the US election today, and in particular, some of the things that have happened over the last week and what we can expect coming up in the next few days. Some of the big news over the last few days include one of the president's attorneys by the name of Sidney Powell being dismissed, perhaps due to some spurious claims. Also some certifications going through, including the certification of the votes in Michigan. Also in Pennsylvania, one of the cases, Trump cases, regarding, a couple of the Pennsylvanians were upset because they had sent in absentee ballots, but they had not properly signed them, the envelopes, the outer envelopes or something, so their ballots weren't counted. Whereas in some other counties, the clerks there, when they noticed that, would try to get those citizens to fix the signatures and whatnot. So, but that course was that there was the defense came out and said, you know, this is not an appropriate case and it should be dismissed. And the federal judge said, yes, not only should it be dismissed, but it should never come back. So it was dismissed with prejudice. So to say. Another news: the recount of a couple of counties in Wisconsin is going on, and in those couple of counties, apparently, at some of the tables where the votes are being counted, the votes are being counted very slowly because each ballot is being objected to by the observers, the Republican observers. So there's a lot of stuff going on. But Nicole, why don't I give you 5-10 minutes to kind of catch us up, and then
Sure.
We can have a bit of a convo about where things, where they've went in the last week, really. I mean, all the changes and where they're headed, and you know, where things are going in the long run. So take it away, Nicole.
The court cases are ongoing, but these are not serious court cases. These court cases are being used as props to foment unrest among the supporters. So there's an enormous difference between the rhetoric in public and what they say in court. If you lie in court, there are consequences. So they have been repeatedly asked in court whether they are alleging fraud. They have said no every single time. They allege fraud on television all the time. There are no consequences for lying on television, but if you lie in court, you can be disbarred, or there are all sorts of consequences. So these are not serious court cases. None of them have been serious court cases. They've lost almost every single one. I think they're 1 for 36 now. All these things that they're throwing mud at the wall, trying to see what will stick. None of it is sticking. And the federal judges are really losing patience with the whole thing, because it's only trying to drag things out. They were trying to drag things out to the point where results would not be able to be certified. So now enough results have been certified, and Emily Murphy at GSA has signed over on the transition. She says in the letter that she sent to the Biden camp that she was allowing them to have the money, but she still didn't consider them the victors, that everything was still going on, but she would at least let them have the money for the transition. So it's something, but they're still not admitting they've lost. There's still no real concession. And they're out there on television. I mean, Jenna Ellis, who's one of Trump's lawyers, put out just very recently, Trump won by a landslide. So they're still pushing this. The only court, there are two courts that they care about. Well, 1.5 perhaps. They halfway care about SCOTUS, but the main court they care about is the court of public opinion. That's the only one that really matters to them. What they're trying to do is create a lasting impression that this election has been stolen, that no election can be run fairly, that everybody cheats all the time, that you can't trust democracy, that everything is illegitimate. That's the purpose of all this, and also fundraising, because they're using all of this as a grift. So they're using this to rake in enormous amounts of money from supporters. But the main thing they're doing in the court of public opinion is building up to an enormous outbreak of violence, because they are just winding these people up so tight. And there's a distinction between the QAnon people and the rest of the MAGA people. The QAnon people think it's all part of the plan. So they're not being violent right now because they don't believe he's lost. If you look at the discussions on their app, which I assume they mispronounce Parler, although it should actually be Parler, but nevertheless, we'll call it Parler because that's what I assume they call it. The discussions on there are just insane. They are the things these people are planning to do, the things these people are discussing. It's crazy. And nobody is pretty much watching because everyone thinks, well, this is the loony bin for the crazy people. And it is, but if nobody else is watching it, then they will plot a crew under the radar and cause trouble. Whether or not they can actually succeed in grabbing power, I don't think they can at this point, but they can ruin the country. They can just wreck things. They can make it completely ungovernable. And I think at the moment that is their strategy. So they're raising money off these court cases. They're just building up an enormous head of steam. The QAnon people think it's all part of the plan. The plan updates all the time, of course. Somebody said, oh, they were supposed to win the election. And then one of the main Q people comes back with, the plan was always to apparently lose the election, to expose fraud in the system, and then win despite the fraud. So they're spinning this line. And it's like any cult. They keep updating the doomsday. And when it doesn't happen, then they just move on to the next one. So that's what's going on with QAnon. The MAGA people, some of them are just getting over it and moving on because they're still reasonably normal people who say, oh, well, he lost an election. So there are people who will not be a threat because they still respect the democratic process, even if they don't like it. But a lot of the MAGA people are really starting to lose it because they haven't got sucked into QAnon and the plan. They don't see any kind of plan. They just see that Trump just lost, or that they still think it's being stolen, but they're the ones who are probably going to be freaking out first. The QAnon people are probably being held in reserve for later on, for whenever the people who are running this scam want to let them loose, because they will. I mean, that's what they're doing. They're building sort of a group of people who will be violent when called upon, and it's under the control of the people who run this Q operation to decide when that will be. I mean, Q is basically a giant game. It's a computer game where you're sort of fed these clues and you're supposed to build the story yourself. And when you do that, when you come to the realization yourself, or at least you feel you have, even if you've actually been drip fed everything, but if you feel you've come to these conclusions yourself, you're likely to hang on to them. So Q works the same way as computer games do. And this is very dangerous because it makes it extremely believable for people. It draws people in. And then it's very hard for them to get out of that because it becomes this completely self-reinforcing ecosystem, if you like. And the truth just doesn't get a look in at all. So there's still shock troops who are absolutely on Trump's side, probably not the full 70 million that voted for him, but a substantial portion of people will now no longer believe in American elections at all. And because they think that the Democrats have cheated, they will now be fully supportive of their side cheating next time. They won't even see it as a problem because they will have been led to believe that everybody cheats all the time and there's nothing you can do about it other than cheat yourself. So this is the myth they're being led to believe. This is being created in order to destroy the next election and everyone after that. So there's going to be a major problem. I think really the United States absolutely has to get away from electronic voting machines. That's one of the issues that Trump is really pushing. He's only pushing it with regard to one company, Dominion. Dominion is a more minor player compared to ES&S. ES&S is wholly part of the GOP. Dominion is bipartisan ownership. So of course they want to get rid of the one that has anything to do with Democrats whatsoever. Personally, I think these voting machines genuinely can't be trusted. They're connected to the internet. They're hackable by an 11-year-old in 10 minutes. I don't regard those as secure at all. And I really think they ought to look at those down ballot races, because you don't lose 27 down ballot critical races by huge margins to people who had 30% approval ratings forever. So I think there are problems there, but there's no way to prove it. So there's nothing one can actually do about that for this election. I just think that they should absolutely go back to paper ballots, because things need to be able to be recounted. And obviously, everyone's going to be calling for recounts. Everyone's going to be looking and scrutinizing everything. So you really need a paper trail, and you need something that isn't hackable. And I think that's the only way to get back to any kind of trust in elections on anybody's part. And I mean, yes, they say this was very secure, and I believe they made it as secure as they possibly could. And I also believe that the people who think it's more secure than I think it is perhaps haven't been reading what Jennifer Cohen has been posting for a very long time about electronic voting machines and insecurity and all sorts of other things. So there is reason to be concerned. There is no reason to be concerned specifically about Dominion. If there's concern about voting machines, it should be about all electronic voting machines, especially the ones where the vote is actually a QR code that you can't read, and the actual name printed underneath that is not definitive of the vote. And there's no way that you can confirm that the name on the vote is actually what the QR code is saying you voted for. So I think absolutely paper ballots need to be brought back in American elections. It will be the only hope of restoring any kind of legitimacy. But the whole Sidney Powell thing is quite interesting, because Sidney Powell is a true believer in QAnon. She's probably the most powerful person who has fallen for it hook, line, and sinker. So she's saying things that come out of QAnon that are actually more radical than the Trump campaign wants to have in the public record at the moment. She sort of jumped ahead. Because she's immersed in this ecosystem and has been for a long time, her view is not the same as the rest of the Trump administration and the rest of the legal team, because they're grifters and she's a true believer. So the things she was coming out and saying, accusing Governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, of actively colluding with a dead Venezuelan dictator, this stuff comes across as absolutely batshit crazy. And they had to get rid of her because she was threatening the Georgia runoffs. Like, there's a limit to how much you can come out and say things like that before people in your own party start to wonder about your sanity. So I reckon that's why they got rid of her, that she was just a bit too much even for them. But she's going to keep on fomenting unrest in the media ecosystem that she's part of. And people are already saying Sidney Powell for president. This should actually be rather terrifying, because Sidney Powell is exactly the sort of person who would be the more competent autocrat that people are suggesting is likely to come in 2024. And I personally believe that too. I think they're setting up for a return to fascism, that they're going to make life so difficult for the Biden administration that they can paint it as a failure, because they'll have put so many roadblocks in its way. So they're setting Biden up for failure. They want to come back in 2024. And I think Sidney Powell is absolutely the sort of person who might do that. She is intelligent. She's absolutely ruthless. And she's a very, very good lawyer when she chooses to actually be a lawyer as opposed to a cult member. So we'll have to see how that goes. But there are definitely problems that are going to be just popping up all over the place over the next 4 years during this administration. I still think that Trump is going to start a war with Iran. They sent a squadron of B-52s to the Middle East today. So I think this is a setup for the war in Iran that he's planning to start. And he's backed by the UAE and Saudi Arabia and Israel in this. He's basically put the US on the side of the Sunnis in the Sunni-Shia schism in Islam. So this is, the US is going to be taking sides on the side of the Sunnis to try and take out Iran, if that happens, to beat the Shia Islam component down, because Iran is a regional power and they don't like that. So this is definitely going to be an issue. If they do that, it will make an unbelievable mess for the Biden administration. The other mess they're making, of course, is COVID. And because the transition was not signed over in a timely fashion, there's been at least 2 or 3 weeks that could have been saved in terms of the spread of COVID. And I think that's absolutely tragic. And because now everyone's heading for Thanksgiving, well, not everyone, but all the people who really don't believe in COVID, which is an awful lot of people, are heading home for Thanksgiving. And this is just going to spread everything everywhere. The college kids are coming home. They're bringing it back with them. I think that the COVID epidemic that we're going to see by Christmas time is going to be one practically for the record books. I just think this is going to be unbelievably devastating. I think within the next couple of months, you could actually kill the US healthcare system, not for lack of beds, but for lack of staff. I mean, the doctors and nurses are just running out of steam. You know, that they just can't keep working at this level. I mean, in New York in March, people flooded into New York from all over the country. They had as much help as they could use, but that isn't happening now because now it's everywhere. So these poor doctors and nurses are finding there's no other hospital they can send people to. They're having to triage. This is just soul destroying for them. I mean, I think it's El Paso where they're putting 4 people in an ICU room when even asking a nurse to look after 2 people in ICU is virtually impossible. And their vitals have to be monitored constantly. And I think it's basically they're putting these people in these rooms to die. These people are not coming out. But if you're a nurse and you have to sit in a room where everyone you look after dies, how long can you take that? Especially if it means while you're doing your job, you've just missed your own Thanksgiving and your own Christmas because you can't go home to your own family. You might make them sick, and you have to watch your colleagues die. And it's not just dying, it's watching them suffocate, sometimes over a week or two, watching them gasp. And I can only imagine what that must do to these people. I don't think that they're going to be able to stand it for all that much longer. I think Arizona was saying that one doctor in Arizona was saying yesterday there were 170 ICU beds. When he got to work today, there were none. And it's not that they had an extra 170 patients, it's they couldn't staff the beds that they had. And I think that is coming. Already, doctors are taking pay cuts of 20% or more because the patients can't afford to pay for the treatment they're getting. So this is going to bankrupt the hospitals. There are hospitals closing already. So if you cut doctors' pay and nurses' pay at the same time as you're absolutely brutalizing them with what they're expected to do, it's just horrific. And I don't see how that system survives that. I mean, the American healthcare system was always absolutely terrible. It's the worst in the developed world by a mile and has been for forever. It's the most expensive and least effective when it comes to dealing with healthcare in general. You can get great healthcare if you're rich, but if you're not, then medical bankruptcies hover over your head. If you get sick, chances are you're going to be bankrupt. Even if you have decent health care through your employer, the deductibles are high. Medical debt is the #1 cause of bankruptcy in the States. Even before COVID, that was true. I can only imagine what it's going to be like now. This is just going to be brutal.
Let's talk a little bit about the economy in general, and especially about what sectors of the economy are hoping for financial help from the federal government. So you've pointed out already the hospitals, especially. And I know some of the things we've heard in the US are that certain states did not accept Medicare expansions. And so this impacted hospitals in their state as well because the patients didn't have money to have treatment.
Absolutely.
But, another thing that we're seeing now is that in Michigan, for example, the movie theaters have all closed again, and the big movie studios are going to release their huge blockbusters on streaming, either exclusively on streaming or at the same time as whatever remaining theaters there might be. We've also been seeing in Michigan, for example, restaurants are not allowed to have people inside the restaurants. So there's a lot fewer people going to the restaurants. The gyms
They're
have been
the things they're
closed.
building, though, they think it's outside. They're building things that are basically extensions of their building. So
Yes.
it's still not good enough.
Well, and let's see,
It's a
the
shame.
other major area was the airlines, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
airlines are only up to half of where they were a year ago, as far as the number of people going through the security gates. So what are we looking at as far as the economy outlook, maybe the market outlook for the next month, 3 months, or year?
Well, it's only a matter of time until you start to see sectors fail. The problem is that the bailouts, such as they've been, have all been for things that were not worthy of a bailout, like the cruise industry. Who on earth bails out the cruise industry before you bail out the hospitals? I mean, Trump does because he bails out rich people. But all the help that's gone out so far from this administration, all the help worthy of the name, has gone to big players in a completely unaccountable way, and they're not even expected to pay it back. So that the small businesses are expected to pay it back, the large ones are not. This was a gift, and it was about $3 trillion, if I remember rightly. And it was all to the very things that have no future anyway, because they all depend on cheap energy and no pandemic and lots of people with disposable income prepared to waste it on stuff like cruises. So that was a complete and utter waste of money. They have done almost nothing to help small businesses and individual people. And when you look at how other countries have handled this, where, I mean, people have been paid 80% of their wages by the government and things while they were asked to lock down, while they're not able to work. So yes, this has increased government debt, but it's kept society functioning. Whereas in the US, they've drastically increased government debt without actually helping people in any way that made any difference. So they've just done a massive bailout for billionaires. People like Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg have made billions and billions of dollars during this pandemic, while everybody else is busy losing their shirts. So it's accelerated the enormous upward push of money from the bottom to the top. It's given a huge impetus to inequality. And I think we're going to see substantial sectors of the economy fail. I mean, restaurants are often, they operate pretty marginally anyway. I mean, my brother is a chef, and he once told me that no restaurant is viable till the kitchen's been bankrupted 3 times, because you can't afford the cost of setting up a restaurant and still expect to be able to pay back the debt you took on to do it. So you can only really run a viable restaurant if somebody else put it all together and you just picked it up in bankruptcy for a song. But that, as my brother says, that might have to happen multiple times before you actually have something that is a viable business. Those are already marginal. Most of them will not survive this. A lot of things will not survive this. I'm really concerned about farms as well, because family farms are going out of business in droves. Again, all the help went to the big players. The small family farms have got nothing, nothing that makes any difference. So they are just being pushed out right, left, and center. So this is going to force a scale up of agriculture, force it away from anything small scale, organic, useful, and towards gigantic agribusiness again. So I think this is a setup for something nasty. I'm not saying that the economy is going to fall flat on its face before Christmas, but I think the US is moving into very, very dangerous territory. The unemployment rate is going to be insane. There just are not going to be the jobs. Trump keeps talking about these V-shaped recoveries. You're looking at an L-shaped non-recovery. I mean, it's not coming back to where it was. And it's because of the complete failure to control the pandemic. You know, people say, oh, it's the economy versus dealing with the disease. It's really not. If you don't just deal with the disease, you will not have an economy, because nobody's going to go to restaurants. Well, the non-believers will. People who don't believe in COVID will go to restaurants, but then they get sick. So that's not going to keep the restaurant industry going, you're not going to get the business that restaurants need, or theaters, or gyms, or pretty much anything like that, until the virus is under control. So the complete inability to do that for almost an entire year is what's absolutely crippled the US economy. And even although the stock market has been doing very well, because it's being goosed absolutely all the time by these bailouts for the large players, that's not reflective of the real economy. The real economy is tanking. It absolutely is. And we haven't seen all the impacts of that yet, but they're coming. They'll be there for 2021, which I think is going to be worse than 2020, unfortunately.
Hey, let's take a look at the let's take a look at the unemployment chart. Can you see this chart, Nicole?
Yep, I can.
So this is from Shadow Stats, Alternative Unemployment for the USA, and it's showing that 26.3% of people that could work, would be willing to work, are actually out of work right now, which is down from 35% back in April. But that's
people
still
realize that's equivalent to the Great Depression already. That's the depths of the Great Depression unemployment, and that's the beginning. I mean, there's been a somewhat of a recovery, as the chart shows, but this is not going to continue because a whole lot of the businesses that these people have gone back to are going to go under. So that employment will not continue. I think we're going to be looking at very much higher levels of unemployment than in the Great Depression. And if there isn't assistance for people, then the country is going to fall apart. And people are not going to sit there and starve to death and not do anything about it. I mean, I don't know how many people have seen how many thousands of cars are in the lines at food banks. And it's absolutely insane. People cannot feed their families. And the government doesn't care at all. I mean, Trump has never cared, because Trump doesn't care about anyone but himself and never, ever has. But Mitch McConnell, running the Senate, should be in a position to provide some stimulus. And he has done absolutely nothing. You would think he would do something, if only to win the Georgia runoffs, but so far, absolutely nothing. And it just seems like he wants, along with Trump, to create the biggest possible shit show for starting January 20th. So have a whole country of people who are sick and starving and angry and businesses failing all over the place. It's just, this is not a pretty picture.
It seems like back in the 1930s, there was a similar problem where there were so many people out of work, like you said.
Yes.
And wouldn't it be reasonable? I mean, if the federal government is going to spend $500 billion or $1 trillion anyway, and you have all these, 10, 20, 30 million people who don't have jobs, wouldn't it make sense to just create those jobs again? I mean, you've already got the plans for making these various jobs, like improving state parks and working on roads. And
absolutely, it would make a huge amount of sense, which is exactly why they're not going to do it.
Now, is there any place?
The Biden administration will try and do it. Once Biden is in power, he will try and do exactly that. But I'm not sure to what extent he's going to be able to have a lot of freedom of action, because the state the economy is going to be in. I think it's going to be very difficult for him to do very much at the beginning. He's going to have to try and get some stimulus through, but I think even that might be difficult. He's not going to be able to deliver the amount of stimulus he would want, because unless they win the Georgia runoffs. If they win the Georgia runoffs, he'll be able to do that. If they don't, then he won't. And that will be very, very sad, because he'll get blamed for whatever happens as a result of not being able to provide stimulus, even although it will be Mitch McConnell's fault if he's still the Senate Majority Leader after January 20th. But yeah, it really is going to be an enormous problem, because they don't do the things that make sense. They haven't done even once throughout the entire term that Trump has been in office. They have never once done anything for ordinary people. That's not what they were there for. They were there to dismantle the country and sell it for parts. They're there to brutalize people. and then to weaponize the anger of brutalized people to bring down the system. So this was not a normal administration. This was an inside job to destroy the country from the very beginning of 2016. This is what it was, and that's exactly the effect that it's had. And he's not stopping now, even although he's lost. He's going to try and destroy as much as he possibly can on the way out. That's simply what malignant narcissists do. And I don't think we've seen anything yet. I think he's got a lot more up his sleeve. At this point, I actually think the situation is so serious that despite the fact that I'm a pacifist and I would never normally suggest this, I think the military should go and take him out right now. I seriously do, because if they don't, he is going to create a national security nightmare for the United States. And he already has in many ways. He's already shared intelligence that with his dictator friends. I'm absolutely sure that he will make sure that he sells every state secret he can get his hands on to his dictator friends. If he isn't removed at this point, he'll start a war. He'll probably start a civil war. It is just, it beggars belief to think what he's capable of. And I think he needs to be removed from power immediately. He's an acute threat to national security, an acute threat to the fabric of society. So I think he needs to be removed immediately and, quite frankly, passport confiscated and taken into custody. Because
from the mainstream media perspective in the US, I mean, most of what like NBC and CBS and CNN and everything, what they're saying is that he just isn't doing anything at all except for griping about the election, and he's not having any public events, and he's not doing anything. And, you know,
he's not doing his job.
He's just, well, right. And he's just kind of downtrodden, but there's not, at least not in the mainstream, don't seem to be people saying that, you know, he should resign, he should be impeached, he should be removed by the military from office.
Oh my God, the media has let your country down spectacularly for 4 years. They haven't even called him out on his lies. They won't call a lie a lie. They have sidelined all the mental health professionals who would have been able to explain this to people. The media has been absolutely complicit in this. The media have done a terrible, terrible job throughout this administration. They've relentlessly normalized him. They've edited his speeches to make them sound coherent. They've both sided every issue to make it look as if there was a symmetry between bad things on both sides. There absolutely is not. There is no symmetry whatsoever. You have an insurgency in administration, and then you have people who are desperately trying to prevent it being successful. That's what the media should have been talking about, and they comprehensively failed to do their job. So I follow an enormous number of psychologists and psychiatrists. They have been jumping up and down from the rooftops of this for 4 years, and they've never been allowed to speak in public. The media never gives them a voice. They have tried to warn people of this. So this is part of the problem. This is why people don't see Trump for the threat he really is, because the media has not informed people about any of these issues. So you can't take anything at face value. I look read between the lines, go to the original sources all the time. And if you don't do that, you get a really, really distorted, incorrect picture of what's actually going on. And this is why people don't believe that things are in the state that they are. People don't necessarily think this is an attempted coup. They think it's a temper tantrum. But it is an attempted coup. It absolutely is. Because if you can get enough power on your side, then the law doesn't matter. The courts don't matter. The Constitution doesn't matter. Power matters. This is a power grab. That's what makes it an attempted coup. I mean, he's doing everything he can to hang on to power, knowing that it probably won't work. But the very act of trying it is destroying the fabric of society, because it's building up huge numbers of people who are saying things like, you know, if Trump calls us out onto the streets, we'll go. You know, sensible people, normally sensible people anyway. I posted a really heart-rending video of someone calling into Rush Limbaugh the other day, basically saying, what did we do, Rush? You and Trump are the only ones protecting us. And all this sort of, like, this man was just about to lose it on air. And he's not the only one. They're terrified because they've been told they only inhabit the right-wing media ecosystem. They have been consistently told that the Democrats are socialists, if not communists. They're going to ruin the country. They're going to close all the churches. They're going to purge all the Christians. Literally, this is what these people have been told. This is what they believe because they don't get any contrary messages to that. So as bad as the mainstream media is, as much of a failure as the mainstream media has been, the right-wing media ecosystem has been infinitely worse. They've been feeding people a pack of lies for 4 solid years. Well, for a lot longer than that, but certainly during the Trump term, people have heard nothing but a pack of lies. So they are not informed on any of these issues. In fact, they've been deliberately misinformed on every issue that matters.
Now, I have a question about that, which is
Sure.
why has Fox News not been as so pro-Trump as they have been? Is this because Rupert Murdoch has decided that, you know, Trump isn't good for business anymore, or that it would be better to have Biden in there so we can have someone to rail against? Or, I mean, because, you know, people are apparently listening to OANN and Newsmax and Epoch Times and, you know, New York Post and Limbaugh and all these really
listening to the New York Post very much longer. That's a Murdoch paper too. And you're absolutely right. Murdoch has decided that Trump has to go. And so the thing is, what happened in America is comparable to what happened
Murdoch is an Australian, right?
I know.
And it amazes me that there's this Australian born in
He's
Australia.
a kingmaker.
His parents were born in
3
Australia,
countries.
Melbourne. Yeah, and he is coming and influencing the U.S. I mean,
Yeah,
sure, he's a
kingmaker in
naturalized.
3 countries.
Yeah,
He does the same thing in the UK. He picks prime ministers in the UK.
I mean, if we're talking
It's insane.
if we're talking about foreign interference in the U.S., I mean, he's a foreign actor right there, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
so what did
That is foreign influence.
So what that he was able to pay for his official citizenship? I don't think he's even living in the U.S. right now.
I have
think
no
he's
idea.
Back in Australia or something.
Yeah. His son Lachlan runs Fox News now anyway. There was an epic battle between Lachlan and James because James is a normal person. He's a globalist and probably not the nicest person on the face of the earth, but he's at least a normal person. Lachlan is not a normal person. He's very much in the Trumpist kind of vein. So it's not that Fox News has had an epiphany, is suddenly going to be responsible, but they are going to dump Trump. So this looks very much like what happened in Germany with the rise of Hitler. The elites have people like that. They let people like that get into power because populist positions are popular. And they think they can control the populist. But once the populist gets into power and builds a cult of personality, the elites lose control. So from the point of view of Republican elites and the donor class, Trump was he was great, a great distraction for 4 years. He kept people so distracted and so traumatized that they managed to push through umpteen things they'd never have got through before. It's the shock doctrine implemented in the US. So he was good for that. That's why they were prepared to let him be there. But he has now become a threat to them because his cult of personality has completely taken over the Republican Party. And now an enormous number of people are loyal to him personally. He has a power base that they never anticipated he would have. This is now a threat to them. So now the oligarchs, if you like, are going to try and take him down. Murdoch is one of them. He's not the only one. Charles Koch has been saying, oh, well, maybe being partisan was a bad idea. You know, there are all sorts of people at that level who are starting to think, yeah, maybe this wasn't such a good thing in the end. And we better finish him now because if we don't, it'll be too late. So I think this is why he lost when everybody else down ballot who mattered won. So they've kept control of the Senate. That's all that really matters. They need control of the Senate because with the Senate, you can block anything you don't like. So you can prevent the other side from having any successes. at least legislative successes anyway. And you can hobble them in every possible way and get the blame shifted onto them. So I think they cared about keeping the Senate, but I think they let Trump hang. And I think they will continue to let Trump hang. But now we have to see what his power base does. His power base does not include the military, which is interesting because it's awfully difficult to have a coup if you don't have the military on your side. The military despises Trump. They voted for him in places 4-1 against. He called them suckers and losers. They will never forget. They will never forgive him. So he will never have the support of the military. General Milley said so directly to his face, pretty much. So this is not happening. So he wants a mob instead. And it won't be just a mob. He will have other parties with him. He will have Border Patrol and he'll have ICE and various other prison groups and things like that. The ragtag half-official mob that he deployed on the streets in DC and Portland who were stuffing people in unmarked vans and things like that. There'll be them.
Like he also has a lot of support from the police in the U.S.
Yes, he does. Almost every police union backs him. And that thin blue line version of the American flag, that should terrify people. Because how many years will it be until that is your official flag and you're officially fascist? That's where that's going. So this is a hardline right-wing vision of America that's represented by that thin blue line flag. So he has a lot of the police. He has CPP, he has CBP, he has ICE, he has various prison people, and he has the mob. The mob as in the organized crime mob, and also his mob of people he's been trying to get right to the edge. So this is he's still in a position to wield considerable power. And the kind of power that he can wield is the power of destruction. He can destroy things. I don't think he can take over the country and maintain connection with power in the official way. But that may not matter if being outside of power, he has the power to bring the country to a standstill anyway. Because that's a kind of power that really, really matters. This is realpolitik, if you like. So realpolitik means never mind what the official rules are. Politics is the art of the possible. What can you get away with? That's what realpolitik means. And Trump is a master of realpolitik because he knows exactly how to find every single weak spot and exploit it. And we saw that with the election where he was trying to pick on the tiny little functionaries who all they have to do is sign something saying, yes, these results, we've seen that these results are certified. But he will find these little people and put enormous amounts of pressure on them. He'll bribe them, he'll threaten them. That's what he was doing with Emily Murphy at GSA. So he's controlling the levers of power in ways that nobody had really anticipated. And he doesn't just do this with organizations, say find the weak individual in an organization. He also finds the weak spot within individuals in order to be able to control them. So he will find whatever it is their weakness, tempt them with it, record it, then he has compromat, and then he can get them to do whatever he wants because he's destroyed their reputation. And now they're beholden to him because they know that he could ruin them at any time. This is what he does to everybody. And this is how the mob works. They have a web of compromat. And that's what keeps them all honest, if you like, honest at least with each other. They don't betray each other because every one of them knows they have compromat on every other one. So this is how the mob maintains control. And they do it with hints and, oh, well, you wouldn't want that to happen. And it's like, nice country you have there. Wouldn't want anything to happen to it. That's the way the mob talks. So when the law says, well, you need to prove that someone gave a direct instruction, the mob doesn't give direct instructions. They use coded language. And then people don't see it. People don't see it for what it is. Trump uses coded language and dog whistles all the time, absolutely all the time. So does Sidney Powell, by the way. I mean, if you look at the stuff that Sidney Powell is saying, it's QAnon everywhere. If you know what to look for, every sign is there. This is why I suggest to people to familiarize themselves with what QAnon means. while bearing in mind that it is a psyop and they should under no circumstances fall for it. So the danger of people looking into it is they might actually decide, oh, well, maybe this makes sense, even though it doesn't. But people need to know what's going on with QAnon. They absolutely do. It's an extremely dangerous movement for the exact same reason that it was in the Third Reich when it was called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. So this is just a retread of previous conspiracy theories, and it combines Gnostic Christianity. So Gnosticism is sort of Christian, but sort of not. Steiner schools practice Steinerism, anthroposophy, theosophy. These are forms of Gnostic Christianity. They tended to be sort of ways to underlie oppressive regimes, partly because they're very flexible. You can shoehorn almost any conspiracy into QAnon. It's sort of a meta-conspiracy, if you like. It's a combination of all conspiracies rolled into one. And the idea is to destroy the very idea of truth, the very notion that you could know what is and is not objectively true. So they just tie these people up in such an unbelievable Gordian knot of conspiracy theories that they no longer know what on earth is going on. And in the Third Reich, one of the things they did, they started with anthroposophy and things like that. They took Steiner's ideas and imported eugenics and things from the United States. So Nazi Germany got its ideology from the US in the 1930s. The US really needs to think about how close it came to being fascist back then. So, but they took this Gnostic Christianity combined with eugenics and all these things and turned it into something else, a different kind of religion. And what they were on the verge of doing, what they were moving towards, was actually replacing Christ with Hitler. To say, well, we used Christianity as kind of a stepping stone, but now we see that the next Messiah is Hitler. That's kind of where they were going with that in the 1930s. Trump will do the same, unless he drops dead or something.
This reminds me of something that my sons and I were looking at this week, and I'm gonna throw up a couple things on the screen here. So the first was,
yes.
Let me see if I can do this right. Let's see.
Yeah, that's absolutely the way to look at it. Formal power is only one part.
Well, and this was what we were looking at. We were looking at a PBS program called the Dictators Playbook, and it's a series of 6 episodes. And my sons and I watched this one about Kim Il-sung of North Korea, and how he came to power and how he established this country so that he could pass the reins of the country down to his son, who
a
then
dynastic
passed it down.
kleptocracy. Trump is absolutely trying to install a dynastic kleptocracy.
Well, and these videos are free. They're online on the PBS website for the Dictator's Handbook. And then there are multiple episodes. There's one on Saddam Hussein and Manuel Noriega and Francisco Franco, Idi Amin. Was there a Hitler one as well? There wasn't one, but Benito Mussolini. So, and they did also talk about Joseph Stalin when they were referring to Kim Il-sung. So it's kind of interesting that people are kind of there are people who are thinking about and are concerned about
there are.
Trump. And from my perspective, when you're talking about power, you know, Trump has this cult of personality, but that's kind of like a charismatic power.
Yes, it is.
It's not like a formal power or a legitimate power. It's, I mean, he coerces people. So the way I learned it years ago was there's positional power and then there's non-positional power, more charismatic power. And like MLK Jr. and Gandhi, they didn't have formal legitimate power, but they had this charismatic power and they had this moral authority, I guess.
Yes.
And so power can come in many different ways. And just because Biden has the positional power and he has the backing of, you know, half the nation, Trump can also maintain a huge amount of power even after the election.
And his dynasty could maintain power after his death. There's no guarantee that would work. And I think on the whole that people are so sick of the Trumps because they were so obvious about their grifting. It was just so absolutely obvious that they were robbing the country blind that I think his ability to actually have a dynastic kleptocracy at this point he's probably shot that in the foot himself. So I don't think people like Ivanka are going to be welcome at the Met Gala, for instance, ever again. So I don't really see a route to power for his children unless the whole MAGA QAnon thing just takes over everything. That is possible, but I hope at this point that isn't going to happen. We'll just have to wait and see. But in a way, it doesn't even matter if it's one of his children who takes the mantle. There are many, many Republicans who are going to be vying for 2024. And the list of names is pretty awful. The Lincoln Project put out a helpful compendium of all the people who are likely to be running, pointing out why none of them should be allowed anywhere near power.
Are you calling this a rogues gallery, so to speak?
Oh, yes. It's absolutely a rogues gallery. Sidney Powell wasn't on the list for the Lincoln Project, in the Lincoln Project ad, but she is very much going to be on the list if QAnon puts her there, and I think they will. Because she's exactly the kind of person that they would want. You know, she is just ruthless. So it'll be interesting to see how things go. But I think he's absolutely trying to set the stage for the kind of oligarchy that you see in the Soviet Union, or well, the former Soviet Union. Because what happened was the well-connected people who were in positions of power when the country fell basically took personal control of all the country's assets for pennies, like for next to nothing, and they just ended up owning almost everything, and they could take anything they wanted because they were very well connected. So in Russia, what you get to keep depends on how high your political roof is. There are no property rights or anything like that are remotely stable. So if you're not well connected, anyone can take anything you have at any time, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. So they really turned it into an oligarchy where ordinary people really don't get much of a look in at anything ever. And it's all run by the mob in Russia. Probably China too, although I haven't really looked into the Chinese mob, so I can't really comment on that. Whereas I used to work on Soviet studies for an awful lot of years. I do know about the Russian mob. I could even tell you names. But you know, these are the people who basically own Trump. Some of the people who own Trump. So Semyon Mogilevich is the Russian one. He's the capo di tutti capi in Russia, the head of the Russian mob. And so Putin is absolutely part of that too. But Putin is only probably in power at the pleasure of the Russian mob, because they're the ones who have the real power, even in Russia. The real power and the formal power are not necessarily in the same place. But they're not the only ones who own Trump. The Saudis own him, the Emiratis own him, the Israelis own him. And the interesting thing is when those interests collide, if you're owned by multiple parties and those parties' interests are not necessarily aligned, then you can get in trouble trying to please one master and pissing off another. But this whole war in Iran that he's plotting is very much to please the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Israelis, may or may not please the Russians. So that will be interesting to see how that goes. We don't know yet. I do think odds are that he will start a war in Iran. But I don't know how it will play out from there. What kind of war? Will he just bomb a few things and then say, okay, we've bombed things, that's it? It won't end there. One of the things that might have deterred him, because he's tried to start a war with Iran twice already and pulled back at the last minute. One of them was fairly recently, one of them was a couple of years ago. But one of the things that might deter him from doing that, or at least might make him think twice, is the Iranians have said, if you do this, we're going to come after you personally. So they've said they're going to go after his assets. So they won't necessarily retaliate against the United States, but they will retaliate against Trump himself. So that has to give him pause. This is the only reason that I don't think it's an absolute slam dunk that he's going to start a war in Iran. So, because there could be consequences for him at a personal level. If it weren't for that, I think he would absolutely start one tomorrow. And he still may do it. We just don't know yet. But it is one of the most destructive things he could possibly do. And given that he absolutely loves destruction, this is probably what he will do. So my guess is that that will happen. So I think that the real twin disasters that will be facing Biden on January the 20th are Iran and COVID. That would be my guess. Plus mobs in the streets, quite possibly. I think Biden's inauguration might not go off terribly peacefully. I can only imagine the level of security that they're going to have for that. So I do not think stability is right around the corner for the United States. I think people need to be absolutely vigilant. They really need to look behind the headlines. And I mean, there are reporters at various papers who are worth listening to, who really do get it and have been talking about it all along. But it's not like the whole mainstream media has done a good job. They absolutely have not. So if people are just reading headlines, taking things at face value, they will not be informed about these issues. They really, really need to read between the lines, find the reporters who are trustworthy on this and follow them, or better yet, go to the direct sources. Go to the experts that the journalists quote. The people the journalists go to find out what's going on. Go directly to those people. You can do that on Twitter. You can ask them personally. And sometimes they'll actually answer you. Even people, you would think, how on earth is this person listening to little old me? But sometimes they do. And if they don't, then the comment thread usually explains things. So there'll be other people who jump in on these comment threads who have all sorts of other information that can be really interesting. There are trolls too, but I've never had a problem with trolls on Twitter. I didn't even tell anyone I was there, and I do nothing to try and expand my followership on Twitter because I don't want to be dealing with trolls. But I go out and I use it as a tool to gain information, and I will put comments in other people's threads and things like that. And if you do that, it's an incredibly powerful tool, and you will get your information in real time. And you will get decent interpretations by people who really know what they're talking about. And it's so much better than just relying on mainstream journalism. Mainstream journalism is corporate. They love Trump. He made money for them, enormous amounts of money for them. The ownership is corporate. So the editorial standards, it depends on the paper as to how tightly they're enforced. Some papers, even if they are corporate, do employ journalists who get it and are allowed to say what they genuinely think. But on the whole, you can't trust it. And that really is a shame, because you would think, an independent media is absolutely critical to holding power to account. When you have a media that is not independent, that's actually kowtowing to power, then democracy doesn't tend to last very long. You need an informed citizenry for democracy to work. And you absolutely do not have that in the States. You have about half the population gets all its news from things like Fox. So they're wildly misinformed. They know less than people who have never watched a news show in their lives because they've been misinformed the whole time. And even the people who do care and do try and inform themselves are often being misinformed by the mainstream media. The interesting thing now, to go back to something you were mentioning before, why are people now questioning Fox and why is Fox not pushing the Trump line as much? Well, I think Fox has done such a spectacular job of radicalizing half the population that now they're trying to slightly recognize reality and pull away from Trump. What they're finding is their audience is leaving in droves, seeking out more radicalization. So they've become so radicalized that they are actively looking to self-radicalize as much as physically possible, or mentally possible, if you like. And that's why they're all on OAN and Newsmax, where they will never hear one single word of truth, where reality will absolutely never get a look in. And they're on Parler, where they're all kind of working each other up into an absolute frenzy. They don't even need external sources to radicalize them anymore. They're radicalizing each other and radicalizing themselves more and more and more. That's why this is so dangerous. And I think those news organizations really should not exist. It's awful to think that free speech is dangerous. I'm a huge proponent of free speech. And on the whole, coming from a background in law, what lawyers do in cases like this is they will take cases to defend the worst of the worst people. Because if you can defend rights for the worst of the worst, you are defending them for everybody else. So if even the worst people get to have rights, then everybody gets to have rights. This is why lawyers do that. People hate it because they don't really understand that's what lawyers are doing, but lawyers are trying to defend everybody when they do things like that. But, so I do think that those rights are extremely important. And if you take them away from some, you will eventually take them away from everyone. But at the same time, there are times in history where some kinds of speech can be unbelievably dangerous and really, really radicalizing. And that's a very difficult circle to square, because you've got competing rights. You've got principles that matter on both sides. And you have to try and find some kind of compromise between them.
Well,
that is going to be difficult.
That reminds me of two things, actually. One thing, and we're going to need to wrap up here in a few minutes, but number one, it reminds me of the Charlie Hebdo cartoons out of France and the more recent cartoons and the couple of beheadings a month or so ago. It also reminds me of this this film that was made in the U.S. about the North Korean dictator a few years ago. The Interview. It was called The Interview. And
okay, I haven't heard that one. I should look it up. Right.
So it's a farce about this this reporter from the U.S. who is trying to go to interview the North Korean dictator, and they paint the North Korean dictator as a buffoon, basically. And so North Korea threatened to have some sort of military strike or something on the U.S. if this film was released, and it didn't end up being released by the major theaters. It was only released in independent screens. But the interesting piece for me is that while this is strict freedom of speech, you got to wonder, is it really moving us forward? And in the same way that you're saying that OANN and Newsmax and Fox and even the rest of the mainstream media are not necessarily giving people what they need. I mean, unless
they're giving them they're giving them things they need, like a hole in the head. I mean, they're giving them the kind of disinformation that will cause them to ruin their own lives, and that is absolutely tragic. It's such a thorny issue, censorship, because I mean, if you say, well, then we're going to ban anything that isn't mainstream, a whole lot of mainstream information is wrong. So then you would actually be banning the truth. In a lot of ways. I know so many fields that I've worked in or investigated where there are huge problems with the mainstream view of how that field works. Sometimes it's just flawed. Sometimes it's absolutely 100% wrong.
Economics, for example.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many issues. Or when you look at mainstream stuff on energy and they completely ignore energy return on energy invested. If you tried to raise that as an issue, in an environment of censorship, they would probably shut you down. But this is science. I mean, science has to move forward by challenging existing paradigms. When new evidence comes out and you challenge the existing paradigm, and the two paradigms kind of square off against each other, and eventually if the new one coming up is correct, then that will take over. But you can't have that process if you don't have people discussing contentious ideas and allowing new data and new information to come to the fore so that people can change their minds when it's entirely appropriate to do so. So I have a huge problem with censorship for that reason. As well, a lot of people, they think out loud. Not everybody thinks internally. People think by debating. if you stop people speaking, you will stop them from thinking. And you will really put a lid on the propagation of good ideas as well as bad. And it's kind of like trying to force everything into, okay, now everything is static. This is what we've decided is the truth, and it will be the truth forever, never mind what kind of evidence or data might come along. The world doesn't work that way. You cannot just freeze everything in one position and expect it to stay there. So if you're going to try and shut out the bad, you are going to end up shutting out the good as well. But at the same time, if you don't shut out the bad, they're going to radicalize at least half the country, if not more. And then you might have a civil war. And that's also bad. So it's very, very difficult to know where to draw that line.
Well, and I think
I don't pretend to have an answer for that.
Well, and I think the big question for, as far as dictatorships go, if we're looking at North Korea or Russia or Mussolini or Idi Amin or any of these folks, there must have been a point where things maybe could have turned around. I mean, you like to believe that, the point of no return was such and such a day. And had there been a concerted effort prior to that, then they wouldn't have ended up, North Korea wouldn't have ended up to be a dictatorship.
And the good news for America is I actually think you pulled it off. I think you did stop Trump before reaching the point of no return. On balance, I don't think his coup will succeed. He's still going to try because the very attempt creates the chaos and destruction that he loves anyway. So he will still try in every possible way, but I don't think he's going to succeed at this point. So I think the US has pulled back from the brink, but only just, because there's been a huge groundswell of fascism in the United States over the last 4 years. People feel absolutely liberated to be their very worst selves. And that's been pretty obvious in the way the fabric of society has frayed so substantially. And there's almost complete loss of civility and actual discussion of contentious issues. People cannot discuss contentious issues anymore, only with people that agree with them. You can't have a real discussion, and that is tragic. That is a huge, huge problem. But I don't think Trump is going to end up being the United States' dictator. Somebody else probably will, and probably in 2024. But at least, hopefully, you get at least 2 years until the next set of midterms when the Democrats will probably lose the House. And then they'll impeach Biden on some pretext for whatever. It won't matter. So you get a couple of years. But Kennedy only got, 2.5 years? And people remember him. He managed to achieve some significant things. So who knows what Biden can achieve in the couple of years he will get, I think. And who knows? It's going to be challenging, but I think fascism is still the threat. And just watch what happens with 2022, 2024. People need to be vigilant. They can't go back to sleep and just assume that if Trump leaves, that everything will be fine and they can go back to normal and not pay attention anymore. They absolutely have to pay attention, because if you don't pay attention, your country gets away from you while you're not looking.
The capitalists are playing in both parties.
They are. They always do. There was a really interesting book my father gave me once called Trading with the Enemy, and it was about how American companies were quite happily trading with both sides in World War II, for instance. Because when there's money to be made, morality takes a back seat. There is no morality in capitalism. It's completely immoral. And so, yes, they will do that. And there will be bad things that will happen as a result.
All right. Well, thank you so much again, Nicole. We've had a good chat. And for those of you that are watching, thank you very much. Nicole talked a little bit about Twitter and putting together her Twitter feed. I found that very interesting this past week as we were following the court case in Pennsylvania last week. I managed to get onto the phone call to listen to the call, and I was able to search for one of the attorneys' names, Aronsky or something. And by doing that, I was able to find a bunch of attorneys who were following and tweeting. So
yeah, then you get all the inside scoop on it, on everything in real time. It's brilliant.
So if you want to go back, and Nicole and I put together a couple videos where Nicole talked about a number of the people in her Twitter feed. I think you had like 100 or more people.
I have about 500 on, but I mean, of the ones I didn't end up mentioning, people can always go to my Twitter page, and I think it'll tell you who follows me. I've never actually tried to do that, but I have a feeling you can check who follows people. So they can follow me and then check, or they don't even have to follow me if they don't want to. They can just see who I follow if they want to go to the original sources. Because I really think this is time to pay attention. I just use my own name.
Okay. All right. Well,
but my profile picture, in case there are multiple Nicole Fosses, mine is at Nicole Foss 7, and my profile picture is a fern with dew on it. So it's not a picture of my face. It's a picture of a fern with dew, Nicole Foss 7. So if people want to follow me, that's absolutely fine. I mostly don't post my own tweets. I retweet. So it's my collection of information rather than my own opinions that you get on my page. So you see all the things I thought were important that other people had posted. The reason I don't really post on Twitter myself is that I do not like 280 characters. I want to say what I need to say, and I don't want to have to worry about threading the thing or whatever. So I do that on Facebook, because Facebook lets me post whatever length of comment I felt the need to post without having to play games and things like that. So you won't find a lot of my opinions on Twitter. You'll occasionally find my comments on other people's posts. But the main thing is that if you follow me or look at my page even, you can see who I follow and who I consider my primary sources. And so the way I set up Twitter as well is I pick a few people who I want to see absolutely everything they have to say. Every single day, I want to know everything these people said. So I have a sort of inner Twitter and where I follow all of them, everything they put up. And then I have an outer Twitter where once I've finished my inner Twitter, I will go and consult my outer Twitter. And I don't see everything all these people say. It's sort of a random, I dip in and out and see what people have to say. And that's just all the time I have. I mean, I would read more if there were more hours in a day, but I actually do this pretty much every waking moment of every single day, 365 days a year. So there just aren't any more hours in a day for me to read any more than I already do. But at least that gives me what I consider, a reasonable sort of snapshot of what's going on at any time. I would also recommend a book that came out recently called Strongmen by Ruth Ben-Ghiat. So that's one that I think people should get. It's only come out in the last week, but it's basically like that program you were talking about. It's about dictators, about autocracy, how it arises, how it has arisen in different times and different places, and what the parallels are with the current situation. Ruth Ben-Ghiat is a historian of autocracy, so I would recommend that. And if people really, really want to find out what Trump is like, read Sarah Kendzior's Hiding in Plain Sight, because she will give you everything. The reviews of that book have been just absolutely incredible. Sarah has been right about everything all along. She really is phenomenal. So I would very much recommend that.
All right, well, thank you so very much, Nicole. Thank you, everybody, for viewing. If you would like to thumbs up and comment, I really appreciate that. Yes, we are doing a lot of election coverage, but that is not only something that people in the U.S. are interested in a great deal, but Nicole also seems to have a great insight into. So thank you again, everybody, so very much. We hope to see you in our next video, and we have many recordings of Nicole. She probably, it's 30 or 40 hours or 50 hours of Nicole and I chatting. So please feel free to look back in YouTube and take a look at those. So thank you, everybody. And I hope everything is the best with you. Keep those masks on, keep that social distancing, and keep washing those hands. Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye.